Can you remember what the primary triads are in a key?
One,
One,
four,
4, 5.
1 and 4 and 5. That's right. The ones that are major triads. And those are the ones that most of your hymns and most of your songs, happy birthday, whether it's that or Mary Had a Little Lamb, even, whatever it is, it's all going to be ones, fours, and fives. But you have secondary triads, and those are kind of your supporting cast in the in your overall scheme of things in the stage. Now, when we talked about the primary triads, we talked about you double the root, okay, and when you're moving from one to the other, you keep the common tone if there is one, and so forth. Secondary triads is pretty much the same thing, except I'm not going to have you memorize all the different rules because you have them right there if you ever need them. I'm a big believer in not memorizing something. It's like, Glenn, you tell them, what does it say on the across the front at Florida State on the front of the philosophy building? What is emblazoned in the letters across that?
half of knowledge is knowing where to find it.
That's right. It says the half of knowledge is knowing where to find knowledge. So why memorize it if you can look it up, if you know where to look it up? So they have a chart for you on page 144 of your textbook. Now, right now, and this has been by design. Just about everything that we've been covering has been major keys because that's where all of your real common practice era guidelines are best learned and best demonstrated. That's where you can really see that one, that four, that five, and all that. When you get into the minor keys, you got to finagle it to really get that function out of it. And in fact, this next week, along with secondary triads, we're going to introduce. I'm going to say reintroduce because I know you covered minor keys and minor scales back last semester, but it wasn't in any useful context that you could really get value from. And so I kind of hold off on using the minor keys too much until we've covered most of the basics that will give you that firm foundation, and then you can start to appreciate and understand the use of those minor keys a little bit better. Okay, so for now, and they will tell you, look at this. I mean, if you have your textbook, you may not, but okay. So you've got in the major key, your secondary chords, the 2, 3, 6, and the 7. Um, they're all either minor or diminished. Um, Now, in the minor keys, they're all over the place. Your 5 is not a major chord. That's why we created the harmonic form of the minor key so that you could sharp that middle note of the 5 and have an actual 5/7 leading to the 1 like you've seen the value of in the major keys. So if you didn't do that, then minors would just be your secondary chords are the ones that are major, and the ones that are the primary things that drive establishing your key are not even not major triads. And so that's why we had to artificially create that extra leading tone, that raised leading tone that also happens to be the third of your 5 chord. So for this week, we're only really going to be dealing with the top of the chart they gave you. We're not going to talk yet about the minors, except just to say that there is one rule that really works in minor keys that also works in major keys, and that is the concept of what is it they call it? Hang on a second. they call it circle progression. I had to get out for a second. Circle progression. It's like the circle of fifths. Okay, using the circle of fifths when you're determining what secondary chords you want to use in your chord progression. And what I mean by that is the strongest progression with the most pull and is the 5-7 to 1 or the 5 to 1. And if you look at the 5 going to the 1 and you look at the bass, okay, let's just say we're in C. Okay, here's our C chord. We have a D, E, F, G, A, B. Okay. Going from the 5 to the 1. Okay, so let's put a bass note, do bass here. 5 in the key of C is a G, going to the C. You see that interval there? It's going up a perfect fourth, right? 5 to 1. So the 5 to 1 movement in the bass is the strongest pull. It moves you toward a cadence, and that's even true of your secondary chords. So a 2 chord right here, okay, so if you've got a 2 chord, what do you think that is going to want to pull toward? If you go up a perfect fourth, it's
Fourth,
going to
yeah.
want to go to the 5 in the bass, because the 5, that's really because it's that movement. So the 5 wants to move to the 1, the 2 wants to move to the 5. Okay, and in fact the strongest progression that there is, and they even give it to you in your book on the second page, the 3 moving to the 6, okay, and then the 6 moving to the 2, and then the 2 moving to the 5, and the 5 moving to 1. That's moving in perfect fourths all the way up for the root, okay? So you might want to keep that in mind sometimes if you've got a progression going, a harmonic progression, you've got a 2 there. You may want to take it on to the 5, or if you've got a 3, you may want it to go to the 6 next. So if you're moving toward a cadence, okay, so think about your 4-measure phrase. You're probably going to start with a tonic key, the tonic chord 1, and probably if you've got 2 4-measure phrases, and the last phrase, the second part, the two phrases together are called a period. Okay, you got 2 phrases making up an 8-measure period. The last chord of your period is going to be probably an authentic cadence. Probably the the ending chord of your first phrase is going to be a half cadence, right? You'll probably end up on the 5, and then you'll go back, and then you'll resolve the whole thing at the end. So when you're thinking about moving toward that 5, you may want a 2 chord before that, and before that 2 chord, you may want a 6 chord. You can think about it going back like that if you want. Um, and there's nothing wrong with looking at some of the hymns in your book and looking at the progressions they use. There's nothing wrong with looking at other progressions for inspiration, changing up your melody, changing up the inversions or something, because a lot of the hymns have very similar sounds to them, have very similar progressions. Feel free to use those, but just pay attention to the same. Now, let's talk about the rules. We talked about 1 to 4 and 1 5. Even with your secondary triads, you still want to avoid parallel fifths and parallel octaves. Okay, that's going to be paramount always. Um, Now, and they'll also give you the rules for doubling, and they all say double the root, except the seven diminished chord. They say double the third. Okay, I don't know why that is, but that's just a general, general thing when you're doing your voice leading. Probably it helps you to avoid parallel fifths or something. I don't know.
It said something. One of the things I read on that says something about avoiding a there was a dissonance that you had to avoid,
Yeah.
and, and that's so you double the third instead.
And a lot of these things, you'll see the reason for them when you start using them, you know. And you'll find sometimes, if you're trying to, if you're depending on what your melody is doing and what your bass line is doing, you may be stuck with having to double a third or something. But if possible, you want to avoid doubling the fifth, unless it's a 1-6-4 chord that's going to lead to a 5-7 to a 1. And it'll tell you in that chart root position. Um, yes, and now this, I don't understand why they would say don't use the seven diminished in root position, because there are a lot of times you will use the root position because you can take advantage of that leading tone to move up to the tonic. So I would say none of these are rules that are going to get you marked off an exam or something. Um, if you just because I gotta turn off these, I need to turn off these notifications. They're popping up. So, so all of these you can use in root position or first inversion. Don't put them in second inversion on purpose, because then it takes on. Now it's not as strong unless it's a major triad. When you put it in second inversion, then it acts like a 5-7, a 1-6-4 that wants to move to a 5 to a 1. So it can be useful if you're modulating, trying to change keys or something. Then you can use the 4 chord in second inversion. Suddenly that 4 chord is a 1 of another key. 1-6-4, move into a 5 in the new key. So anyway, they give you some rules there, and on each one of those, it's note secondary triads are not used in second inversion. That's true, but there are going to be times that you're going to end up with not having a choice, because if I don't put that in second inversion, then I'm not going to be able to avoid this parallel fifth or parallel octave or something. You can break those rules if you need to, as long as and you play it. If it sounds okay, you don't hear anything jarring about it, treat these as guidelines. They're not hard and fast rules, okay, when you're dealing with these secondary triads. Um, they give you a whole bunch of stuff. This is not stuff for you to memorize, as I mentioned before, but you do want to read through it, underline some things, because you may want to come back and refer to it when when it's pertinent to what you're doing. So, now, just like I told you, moving up a perfect fourth will move you toward a cadence. If you do it long enough, you'll get up from the 2 to the 5 to the 1. Going the opposite direction tends to move you away from a cadence. I don't know why you'd want to do that unless you have a really long phrase you want to move away and then back towards it. But just a good rule of thumb is if you can incorporate movement of a perfect fourth up. I'm talking about the root, not necessarily the bass, because a lot of these you will want to use in first inversion or something, but that root moving in perfect fourths makes for a good, strong harmonic progression. Okay? And chords that are a third apart, like a 1 to a 3, or those are the weakest. They do not create that strong pull. either a root going from a, now I mean like a four, or now a four to a five or something. That's just a, that's a, you know, made a stepwise. They give you some good guidelines on you know, chords a second apart. They lack the harmonic drive because they have no common tones. But I think you would agree that between four and five is a good strong progression. You know, four chord going to a five chord, or five chord, five going to a four, because of your, those are your primary chords. So like I said, these are just basic, and the deceptive cadence, five to six, that's pretty strong. So use these as guidelines when you're working on your compositions. Okay. And kind of for now, you'd want to ignore the sixth and seventh degrees in minor keys, because after we talk about minor scales next week, and in fact, I think I've just about decided I'm going to have you do one more assignment this week, and that is um, doing, take a crack at a harmonic analysis of one of the hymns in your hymn book. In this hymn book, it's hymn number 113, We Three Kings of Orient Are. That's one that Glenn and I have looked at before just because it was fun. But it's one of those, it's in E minor, but you'll find out, and one of the reasons I want you to go ahead and do it is because um, it'll show you, number one, the reason why you want that harmonic minor key with that raised seventh, because that, you know, that gives you that 5/7. You'll see D sharps all through it in this E minor hymn. But also, it will show you how having a relative major and minor, there are so many, all of the chords are in common, right? They're all the same chords because it's the same key signature. They're just offset by, you know, by two chords. But sometimes you can leverage that and switch between the major and the minor, relative major and relative minor. And you're going to see that here. What's the relative major of an E minor hymn?
G.
G, right?
G.
So you're going to see it going back and forth. Little, it'll kind of borrow some chords and spend a little time in G major and go right back to E, and then end up at the end of the thing ending up in G major altogether. The whole chorus is in G major. So, um, so the major and minor, relative majors and minors, a lot of times will be passed back and forth, and you'll see it in more than one hymn, not just this one. So I think I'll go ahead, just so you can do it without writing in your hymn book. I will go ahead and download a copy of it, put it in the module, so you can take a crack at that, and then we'll look at it next week. We'll look at the um, you know, at that harmonic analysis, and we'll also look at gosh, I don't even know what kind of I don't even remember what I may actually, I don't know that I'm gonna do that this week. I'm trying to decide, that may be too much, having two harmonic analysis in one week. Um, but I think what I will do, in addition to having, you know what, maybe we'll save We Three Kings for next week. What I'd rather you do this week is they've, oh, and in chapter 11, but be mindful that we're going to be doing We Three Kings next week. If you want to go ahead and look at it in your hymnal, go ahead and start doing analysis, that's fine. But that'll probably be an assignment for next week. Okay. Um, but in chapter 11, what I was talking about moving up a perfect fourth, that moves you toward a cadence, going down or moving up a fifth or down a fourth, it moves you away. And that's on page 150. I forgot they mentioned it in here. So and they give you you know, the doubling and hold the common tone in the same upper voice and so forth. So they'll give you some stuff there. But that's just read it and kind of familiarize yourself with it. And what we'll do is, I'm assuming we're in the same edition, but on page 151, and I will scan this and upload it. And what I want you to do is just do the ones that are in the major keys on this page. The preliminary exercise for secondary triads, page 151, and they'll have like the 2 go into the 5. It's the same equivalent going from 5 to 1. So you'll double the root, keep the common tone. If there is one, you might want to go back and look at your, at your rules and stuff, or your guidelines for voice leading. But go ahead and fill in the alto and tenor. So we're assuming this is the bass and the soprano. So you'll be adding the 2 middle voices for those 2. So like G major, the 2 to go into the 5, and the A major, the 6 go into the 2. So you've got every other one. It's like Mr. Henson having us do all the odd things. We had my brother and I had the same algebra teacher, 4 years apart, but he'd always say, "Okay, we do the even numbers in class, do the odd ones for homework." Well, here we're gonna do the odd ones next week because it'll be minor keys. So just do the ones on this page: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, let's see. Yeah, that's about right. Just the ones in the major keys. So, capital letters. All right. Anything y'all want to talk about? And, when you get into the advanced, um, in the advanced class 1, that's when we'll get into secondary dominance. The 5 of the 5. Just to reinforce this particular chord, they'll give you the 5. They'll count up 5 and put a 5/7, with an accidental in it, to move to that chord to really emphasize it. And you can even use that for modulation or something, but you're going to see a lot of those types of things in the hymnal too. So we'll get into some chromatic chords and things like that that'll be really interesting. But you may wonder whether there are some things that, there may be some things from past chapters that you never really felt comfortable with, or didn't have a good context for those at the time, and want to go back over and talk about those just with a different person explaining it. If there are any gaps you feel like in your knowledge before you move on to the next, to those next chapters that are coming up. I think this class ends on chapter 15, diatonic seventh chords. So, and we've already done 13 and 14. So we don't have too much left to go. And one of the ones that we have not covered is, um, harmonizing. And I'm thinking that doing it for the piano, like piano music, I think that may be the beginning of next term. I'll have to look. Can't remember if it's thrown into one of these. I don't think so. Yeah, harmony. I don't know. Yeah, writing chapter 17 is writing for the piano. So right now we're still doing 4 voice harmony like a chorale, um, or like a hymn, where you'll have soprano, alto, tenor, bass until the end of this term. Okay, are we good?